today I'm going to cover probably the most important module that is required for numerical computing in Python. That module is called NumPy. I'm going to briefly cover three other modules which are SciPy, okay, something called SymPy, and something called Pandas. Okay, so these three I will just briefly mention, but I'm going to cover in detail. So when we saw that if you try to take two lists, okay, because lists are the closest thing to arrays in native Python. If you take a list L1 which is 1, 2 and 4 and L2 which is 4, 5 and 6, and if you type print L1 plus L2, it doesn't do element wise addition. What it does is what is called list concatenation. It just sticks the two lists together and prints out, gives you as an output another list which contains the elements of list 1 followed by the elements of list 2. On the other hand, if you do something like this, L 0 times 3, okay, it doesn't give you 0, okay, or it actually gives you 3 zeros, okay. So what we have done now is we have initialized the third list which has 3 elements and all of them are zeros. Then we put a for loop, okay, for I in range 3. What does range 3 return? It returns a list starting with 0 and having elements 0, 1, 2, 3 elements. So it is basically the way of looping 3 times over that list, over whatever is the content of that for block, and then we do L3I is equal to L1I plus L2I. This is syntactically very similar to what you would do with a do loop in Fortran or a for loop in C, right? You would increment the variable and then for every element by element you would do an element by element addition. If you do it this way in Python, it's extremely slow, okay? It's somewhere between 10 and 100 times slower than what it should be, okay, or what you would like it. But this of course gives you the right answer. If you wanted to add the elements of two lists, you have actually gotten their sum and only having 3 elements by doing a for loop of this kind. Now the thing that you have to get past is, while programming in Python, is the tendency to use a for loop. If you are using a for loop in a numerical computation like this, you are doing something wrong. Those of you who have used IDL, those of you who have used MATLAB are already familiar with the other way of doing things. And what is the other way of doing things? We want L1 to L2 to directly give us the answer. Okay? We want the program to understand that when we say L1 and L2, then we want element-wise addition of every element. Like if you are adding determinants or adding matrices and so on, whatever it is, that's what you mean, right? And in order to enable this, one needs to use a module called NumPy. Okay? Now NumPy itself is a descendant of 2 older modules, one of which was called NumArray, which was developed at the Space Telescope Science Institute, something called Numeric, which was developed by a private company in the US. At some point there were these 2 packages which were competing with each other. Sometimes you needed features from one, sometimes you needed features from the other, so you had to install both of them, and their arrays were not perfectly compatible with each other, and so you had to do all kinds of manipulation in order to do numerical computing. This was the scene even 10 years ago. Okay? Numeric and NumArray both were useful, both were reasonably good, but they were reasonably incompatible with each other. So these people got together and said, why are we doing this and causing headaches for everyone? Let us develop a common package. And so they both gave away their respective packages, their respective codes, and they created this package called NumPy. Okay. So in NumPy, what you need to do is to first create an array. Okay, and the simplest way to create an array is by using the array method. So what we have done here is A equals to np.array 1, 2, 3, and I've just supplied it a list. Equivalently, I could have supplied it with a, what is this? With parenthesis, not with parenthesis, a regular parenthesis. What is that? This is a list. 1, 2, 3 forms a list over here, which I have given it in brackets since it's the argument to a function, to a method. Okay. What is this? What's an immutable version of a list? Tuple, right? So this is a tuple. Okay, it doesn't have square bracket, it has these rounded brackets. This indicates that it's a tuple. But both of these will work. A and B are arrays with identical values. Okay, both of these commands will work. Either list or tuple is acceptable. Okay. Yeah. Forget about this. I'm going to talk about this separately. Okay. Adding arrays with NumPy. So what you do is, suppose you have two lists. L1 is equal to 1, 2, 3. L2 is equal to 4, 5, 6. These are the same lists we started out with. Now I create an NumPy array from this L1 list. I say np.array L1 gives me an array A1 and similarly an array A2. Now remember, this L1 is a list, A2 is a NumPy array. It is not a list. Okay, not a different kind of object. Similarly, A2 is an array, although L2 is a list. So this array function is basically a function that takes a list or a tuple and converts its data type into a NumPy array. Now if you do print L1 plus L2, it does the whole thing. It just concatenates the two lists together, which is what you get here. But now if you do print A1 plus A2, what you get is the addition of the corresponding elements. Okay. Of course, addition is not the only operation you can do in NumPy. You can do a host of other operations. So if you have these A1 and A2, which is our elements, we can add them together, we can subtract one from the other, multiply them together, divide them, even do modulo division. Okay, modulo division basically prints out, does an element by element division and returns the remainder for every division. You can even do things like A1 star star 2, which will basically square every element in place. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 will become 1, 4, 9, right? In order to do string manipulation, so this is with numbers. Okay, we were dealing so far with numbers as the elements of the array, but you can also work with strings. Okay, so I took a string and I converted it into a NumPy array with data type string. So in this case, x1 and x2 are also NumPy arrays. Earlier the NumPy arrays would have a data type of integer. Now these would have a data type of string. Okay. Now if I add two strings together, it basically concatenates them together. If I take the first string, which is hello, and give a second argument 5 and use the multiply function, I am basically repeating that string. Okay. I can convert strings into uppercase. I can check whether the entire string is uppercase or not. If it is not, it will return false. If it is entirely uppercase, it will return true. Okay. So all of these things can be done. So this slide is just to highlight the fact that NumPy doesn't necessarily operate only on numbers. It can also operate on strings. Okay. So now, what are the kind of operations you can do on in NumPy? So now this concept of taking two NumPy arrays and having some kind of operator in between them to do an operation is called what is called a universal function, because it's a function that operates universally in the sense that it operates on every element of the corresponding arrays. So if you are doing an addition, it will add the corresponding elements of the two arrays. So like this, there are greater than 60 operations that you can perform, okay, and they are all listed here, okay. So for example, there is a function called sign. So np.sign of an array will take every element of that array and compute sign of that element, okay, the trigonometric sign of that element. Arccos will compute the cosine inverse of every element, and so on. So there are all kinds of things. Trigonometric functions are there, logarithmic functions are there, some kind of logical functions are there, okay. The standard arithmetic functions are there, and so on, okay. So the power function, of course, is very useful. It even has bitwise operators, left shift operator, right shift operator, the exponential function, and so on. So, sorry? What does left shift do? What does it do in C or Fortran? You're given a number, it takes the binary number, shifts it one bit. Okay, so if you have 1 in the first bit, it will disappear and you'll get a different number as the answer. But if you have 0 in the first bit, of course, and then you do left shift operator and convert that number back into decimal, you'll get the same number. Okay, but there is a left shift operator, you can do a right shift operator, everything. So these are exactly identical to what you do in C. In fact, even the symbols that are used in C are exactly the same. It's not very useful in most cases, but it's there. Okay, so why is a NumPy array not a list? It differs from a list in a fundamental way. A NumPy array must have all elements of the same type. Okay, in a list, you could easily have a list where the first element was 1, second element was j, third element was 3.0, okay, wherein this is an integer, this is a character, and this is a float. Okay, this is a perfectly valid statement in Python. Okay, not true in NumPy. Okay, if you take this as the list and do np.array bracket a, it will give you an error. It will say that you can't mix data types in this way, in a NumPy array. Okay, so what we are basically doing is we are trading off the flexibility of a list in order for speed. Okay, in order to gain speed, and as we shall see, this leads to a very, very dramatic improvement in speed. Okay, so now how does specify a data type for a NumPy array? Okay, in many cases you can do it implicitly. For example, when I say AI is equal to np.array 1, 2, 3, and I do a print AI.d type, it realized that since all the arguments were integers, I should probably make it into an integer type array. So it made a 64-bit integer. Now in the second case, I have a 3 dot over here. Okay, so it realized that there are 2 integers, but the third one is a float. So what I should probably do is up convert all of them into float. So now if you print the data type of that object AF, I get a 64-bit float. In the third case, I put 1j over here, which is a complex number. It realized that okay, there is one complex number in this list, so probably I am dealing with complex numbers here. So I will up convert all of them to complex numbers. So this will become 2 plus 0j and 3 plus 0j and so on. Okay, and the data type of this variable AC is going to be complex. Why do you think it's complex 128? Why not complex 64? Yeah, there are two reals. You need the complex number will have the coefficient of the imaginary part as well as the real part. So two float 64s add up to a complex 128. Okay. So this is called implicit type declaration. But remember that in the Zen of Python we saw explicit is better than implicit. Okay. So although this will work correctly, in order to improve readability of your code as well as to avoid sometimes subtle bugs. Many bugs occur when what you think is an integer turns out to be a float or vice versa. Okay. So do it explicitly. Okay. You can do something like this, np.array, give the list and say this is float. Okay. Now although the arguments are all integers, the data type of this object will be a float. Similarly here I have declared it as complex. Okay. So the data type of this array AC will be complex. Okay. You can also equivalently to this, to float, you can also say np.float, okay, which is just a number constant which maps onto the float data type. Okay. So this is a more preferred, it's a cleaner way of doing it. Do explicit. I mean in Fortran you have to. I mean you have to declare it's an integer type or a float type. You can't proceed otherwise. So follow that practice. Okay, so what are the float data types that are available to you? np.float is the standard Python float type. By definition in Python, this is what you would call a double precision number in Fortran. Okay, it is 64 bits, 8 bytes in size. But for some reason, if you want to use single precision numbers, you have to specify np.float32 as the data type for your array. This float 64 is of course equivalent to np.float. There is something called np.double, okay, which is actually a synonym for, this is already double precision, okay, but there is something called np.longdouble, okay, but that is not unfortunately platform independent. You have to check for your particular platform how many bits it corresponds to. It usually corresponds to float 96 or float 128. So it's either a 96 bit float or a 128 bit. Check it on your platform. Okay, if you really need that kind of precision of long double. In most cases, for most computation, a 64 bit float will give you adequate precision. Okay. So just like there are float data types, there are lots of other data types. For integers, you have 8-bit ints, 16-bit ints, 32-bit ints, and 64-bit ints. Okay. Default type is already 64. Okay. The unsigned integer data types are also available, where you don't have a sign associated with them. Sometimes you need to use these if you're really short on memory and so on, and you're only dealing with positive numbers. So unsigned int 8, 16, 32 and 64 analogously to the ints. Then the complex data types np.complex can be 64 bit, unfortunately not less than that. There is no 32-bit complex number. Complex 128 and complex 256, and there is a dedicated Boolean type called np.bool. Okay. Then of course there is np.char, which I forgot to list here, which is also a character, a string data type. Okay. You are not restricted to using the data types that exist. You can mix and match data types, okay, in order to construct what would be called a structure in C. How many of you know what a structure in C is? Yeah. So a structure in C is basically a way of passing an entity which has multiple variables, each of a different type. Okay. So So what you do first is you define a object dt and you say it's a np.d type, and it has two variables. One is called value, one is called status. The value variable has a data type of integer, and the status variable has a data type of boolean. Okay, and then you can give it a equals np array and give it integer boolean, and so on. Supply it a list. Within the list there is a tuple, and that tuple corresponds to every element of that structure. Okay, and d type is equal to dt. Okay, so you need to specify the data type, and of course dt has been defined previously. Then you can access using this kind of syntax: print a value, a status, a value 1, a 0 status, and so on. You can access any of the elements that you have stored in that particular structure. Okay, structured arrays are particularly useful for reading binary data. Okay, where you have a lot of data, many variables have to be read in. Some are, each is of a different data type, and so on. Then you can define your own custom data type and read in the data. There are a number of convenience functions for creating arrays. For example, z equals np.03 will create a one-dimensional array with 3 elements. np.once10 will create all populated with zeros. In this case, np.once returns a 10-element array with ones as the values, 1.0. I mean, these are all floats. np.empty 10 allocates some contiguous block of memory that is free, and whatever is the content of that memory gets returned. Okay, so these are uninitialized values. This could be anything. Today you run it, you will get some set of numbers. You run it 5 minutes later, you will get a different set of numbers. Okay, so you have to be really careful. I mean, you can't use these numbers. They're all junk. You can do a conversion. There is a typecasting function of operator available, available. It's called np.int. Okay, so if you wanted this, by default returns zeros. I don't think it takes an argument to convert it an int, but if you just put np.int, put a bracket and closed it, that will create a 3-element array of zeros or floats, and then convert all of them to an integer. Okay. Of course, one-dimensional arrays are not the only thing you can do. You can do multi-dimensional arrays, and you are not limited to the number of dimensions you can have. You are limited only by the memory of your the RAM of your computer, because obviously you can't allocate an array that is larger than the memory that you have available. Okay, so for example, now this L2 is, I gave it 2 lists, 1, 2, 3 and 4, 5, 6, which itself were the 2 elements of a list. So this is a list of lists. Okay, and then I converted that into an array A2. L2 is a list and A2 is a array. Okay, so this is the list, this is the array. Okay, and you saw how it got converted. Okay, 1, 2, 3 are the sort of columns, and so it has got 3 columns and 2 rows. Now I do something, then I declare another list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and then I do np.array L3, and I don't get an error. Okay, you would have expected maybe it should give me an error, right? It doesn't. If you print the shape of this array, okay, it's 2. It's got just 2 elements. It's an array with 2 elements. So what it did was, since it couldn't make it nicely into a rectangular array, okay, it has made a list. I mean, it basically contains a list type and 2 elements of the list. So this is a valid NumPy array, okay, but each element now is a list rather than a individual array. So it's not made it into a 3 by 2 array, it's made it into a single dimensional array with 2 elements. 1, 2, 3 is one element and 4, 5 is the other. Okay. Accessing arrays is you can either do it. So if I print L2, these are the values. Print L2 0 1. What should it print? 0 means the first element here. 1 means the second element here. So it prints 2. Okay. I can also do A201, which of course will print the same thing, or I can do print A20, 1. Okay. This will not work for a list, but it works for an array. So wherein you specify along the first dimension which element you want, along the second dimension which element you want. Okay. You can also specify that along the first dimension I want the first element, and along the second dimension 1 colon, that means you start with the second element and print all values. Okay. So 0 means it will take 1, 2, 3 and it is going to print 2 and 3. Similarly for A2, a colon means you print all values of the first dimension but only the first value of the second dimension. So what is it going to print? It's going to print 1 and 4. Right? So you can do any kind. So this is called array slicing. Okay, and we are doing multi-dimensional array slicing. You can determine how many rows it has, how many columns it has, and so on. Okay. So for example, length of A2, 0, it prints out different values. Okay. You'll have to go back and understand this, exactly why this happens. A2 basically refers to the number of rows that you have, and A20 refers to the number of columns that you have in this 2-dimensional arrays. If you print A2.shape, now shape is a value or a constant associated with that particular object A2. Yeah. Where A20 represents the first element of A2. Okay. So all of these will give you valid answers here. The easiest to understand is of course this A2.shape. It basically tells you 2 by 3. It means there are 2 rows and 3 columns in your array. A2 represents the NumPy array version of the list L2. Length of A2 is how much? You might think it should be 6, right? Because elements, it should be 6. That's not right. Okay? It doesn't return the number of elements. It returns the number of elements that you have along the first dimension. Meaning that since there are only 2 rows, it returns 2. Okay. If you had 3 rows, it would return 3. Sort of. Okay. But see, remember, you don't have to do all this trickery. Okay. If you need to figure out what is the dimensions of your array, please use A2.shape. That will print out for you a tuple. It should be easy to understand instead of trying to do something more complicated. Okay. There are lots of array attributes that you can specify. For example, array.ndim will give you the number of dimensions. So if we type A2.ndim, that will print. What will be A2.ndim? L2 is this. A2 is the array version of that. Ndim will be 2. Number of dimensions is 2. A2.shape, we saw that already. It gives you the number of elements along each dimension. Array.size gives you the total number of elements. So if you wanted to know how many elements you have in the array, you do a2 dot size, that will return 6 in our case. And array dot dtype returns for you the type of the data type that you have, float or integer or complex or whatever. Okay. We saw that np dot zeros and so on function. You can also use those same functions to initialize multidimensional arrays. So for example, O equals np dot ones, 3 comma 10, you give a tuple, okay, instead of a single number, you give a tuple. You can initialize the whole array, should be populated with ones. Okay. Now I have initialized here a 3-dimensional array with 4 elements along first dimension, 2 elements along second dimension, and 19 elements along the third dimension. I have specified that it should be a float, and I have done a mp.empty, which is not a good idea. Maybe I should have done mp.zeros or ones. There are a few more functions which are convenient. One is called linspace. Okay, so in this case, it generates 17 equally spaced numbers from minus 2.5 to 1.5, including the boundary values. So if you are making a plot, okay, and you need numbers in a particular range uniformly sampled, you can use the linspace where you give the minimum value, maximum value, and the number of points. Remember, this will put a point at both corners. Okay. Whereas this np.arange is unreliable because upper bound is excluded and rounding errors can cause problems. Okay, so if you're sure that you want to include both points at both edges, then you better off using linspace. Okay. So for example, np.x equal to np.linspace 0 to 3.14 and 100 points, and so on. If you wanted to plot psi y equals sin x, for example, then you generate your x values like this, and then the next line could be y is equal to np dot sine of x, and then you could plot. We'll look at plotting in the next class. Okay. M equals np dot log space minus 239. Okay. What would that do? That generates a logarithmically spaced sequence of numbers that starts with 10 raised to minus 2, ends with 10 raised to 3. Okay. And there will be 9 numbers, include both ends, and they will be logarithmically spaced. Okay. Now, yeah. Yes. No, not a good idea. No. Very, very bad idea. I think that I'll talk about random number generators. They're very good random number generators. Don't use that for generating random. No. Okay. See, because if that array has been populated initially with some numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, okay, and you then get allocated that space, the numbers you will get is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which are not random. Okay. So don't use empty as a replacement for random. Okay. A is equal to np dot zeros 4 comma 4 will generate a 2-dimensional array, 4 by 4 array populated with zeros. Does this work? Okay, it doesn't work because when you are dealing with NumPy arrays, you shouldn't have square brackets of this form. What you should have is the range of the first element, comma the range of the second element, and equals 1. So now we are actually setting values. So what we have done is, with this, we have created a slice of that array and we have initialized it to 1. So all elements were 0 initially. Now a particular slice has been initialized to 1. So you saw that, now I print that values, you will see that these 4 elements got converted to 1s because of what we had specified. Okay. Now I say A0 equals 2. What does that do? Remember, A0 refers to the first element of the array. Refers to the first element along the first dimension. Okay. So it basically refers to the first row. A0 equals to 2 sets the first row equals to 2. what does this do? A colon 1 colon 3 plus equal to 3. So increment by 3 everything along the first dimension and the second and third element of the second dimension. So where will it operate? It will operate on all rows. Okay, we will take this, look at this slice here and look at this slice here. Okay, every value there would get incremented by 3. Okay, print A. And of course the array shape is unaltered by these operations. So with this you can make arbitrary changes to any slice of your array. And we have done this in 2 dimensions, but you can do the same kind of manipulation on a 4-dimensional array or a 7-dimensional array. Okay. So if you want to access the first row, it's A0 comma colon. That's the sort of clean way of doing it. You can also do A0 equals to 4, which means the first row gets set to 4. Okay. There is a special NumPy notation called ... Okay. What that means is AI less than as many colons as needed. This is a very specific NumPy notation. So what this is going to do for you, suppose you have a 7-dimensional array, it is going to take first element along the first dimension and return it to you, irrespective of the dimensionality of the overall array. Whether it's 6-dimensional, 7-dimensional, it doesn't matter. It will put that many colons there. Okay. So here you return you set the second column to 5. Here you set the last column to 6. Okay. How do we know it's the last column? Because -1. -1 you start counting from the end. -1 is the last column, -2 is the second last column, and so on. Okay. So you can do any kind of array manipulation. You can manipulate the values of the array. Here we have set it to a constant. Okay. But you could as well have a complicated expression there, which gets evaluated and then populates the element of that array. Note that there is something called broadcasting which is happening here. So what here you are saying is every element of the second column should be set to 5. Okay. But instead of that, if I had an expression there, the expression either has to return a single value or it has to return the number of values that are needed here. Okay. So in this case, it's a 4x4 array, so 4 elements would be needed. Okay. So that has to be taken care of. If that returns only 3 elements, then it won't work. It will lead to an error. I'm just going to flash this. Okay, I won't even discuss this because we will have better ways of. This is now an obsolete concept because there is a new module called AstroPy, which Kaustubh is going to cover in the last class of this course, where he will talk, I hope, about how to read and write ASCII files from NumPy. But NumPy had its own way of doing things, okay, and I've just listed the code here. You can take a look through it, but we won't spend time. But basically you can decide which columns you want to use, whether you want to unpack or not, and what are the delimiters you want, how are the comment lines specified. Everything is flexible. It has default values, but you can change it. Huh? Unpack equal to true, actually if there is a tuple, then that gets unloaded into multiple variables. Okay, that's the idea behind unpack. So you could have a tuple as an element of your file, right? If you want to unpack that or not. You can even do things like skip rows equal to 3. So if you have some header at the top which you want to skip in your data before you start and so on. Default for comments is hash. Okay, and just like you have this load text command function, you have the save text function, wherein you can write an ASCII text output. So you can write, this is the name of the file you want to write it to, this is the variable you want to write, and this is the format, which is like a standard Fortran format. Okay, but we won't spend time on this. I'll spend a little more time on saving and loading binary arrays. Okay. So suppose you have a NumPy array called data, A range 10, data 2 is A range 20. Okay. So these are just 10 numbers and 20 numbers. They are two separate arrays. Okay. Now I want to save those arrays. This is typically very useful if you are analyzing some data. Okay, you have done some data processing, you are halfway through your data processing, now you want to go home and come back tomorrow. Then you can save your work essentially. You can save the arrays that you want by doing this. np.savez, you give a file name and you say x equals something, y equals something. Okay. So now you are basically just assigning a label x and y to the two arrays data and data2 that you want to store. Okay, and that stores it. That's it. The single command will save it to disk. Now tomorrow you come back, then you give my arrays is equal to np.load tmp my arrays npz. So that's the extension. It's a sort of compressed format, and it will load that into my arrays. Now my arrays x will return for you your data array, and my arrays y will return for you data 2. So that's why I printed them out. These numbers up to 9, numbers up to 0 to 90, which are data and data 2 respectively. Okay. Some of the other basic Python books that you read will talk about a module called pickle and how you can use pickle to store arrays onto disk. But this I think is far newer and a far more reliable way of doing things. If you actually want to save your arrays, either to look at them in more detail or to come back to them tomorrow, like what is shown here, you can do this. Of course, this x and y are just labels. Instead of that, you could have a and b, or you could even have data and data 2. You could have said data equals data and data 2 equals data 2. Label would be the same as the original name of the array. Okay. You can change the dimensionality of arrays very easily. So for example, x is equal to np.arange100. Okay, that is going to return an array with 100 elements. First element 0, second element 1, and so on up to last element 99. Correct? Now on that array I apply a method called reshape, and I give it a tuple 10, 10. So instead of having a one-dimensional array with 100 elements, now I get a two-dimensional array which is 10 by 10. Okay. p.imshow x.interpolation equal to none. So I should have shown that, but that is overwritten by the next imshow. So forget it. This is not showing up. Okay. Now what I do is something interesting. I use a very, very powerful function in NumPy which is called where. Where is a way of basically identifying elements of an array that satisfy a logical condition. Okay. So in this case I say np.where np.logical and x comma 50 x comma 75 less than x greater than 50 x less than 75. So what I'm saying is find for me all the elements which satisfy this condition where x is greater than 50 but less than 75. So the 51 is okay, 74 is okay. So all numbers between 51 and 74, and I put this into square brackets, okay, because these are the elements of the list that I want to manipulate, and I set them to 10. So everywhere where the value of the arrays is between 51 and 74 both included, that will get set to 10. Okay, and then I do an imshow, and that this is the image that I get. Okay, the previous imshow got overwritten by this image, so I should have done it bit cleanly. So what has happened? See here initially you started with lowest values are here 0. It increases slowly. This is the color bar which tells you what the color bar what each color corresponds to. These are those values between 51 through 74 which have been reset to 10. So that's why it is dark blue in color. And then it goes back to the usual sequence and you go all the way up to 99. Okay. So what we have done is we have identified certain elements of the array and we have changed their value. Okay. There are more than 400 functions in NumPy doing everything from rebinning to obtaining polynomial least square fits, etc. So you will have to go through the NumPy documentation in order to go through them. I have introduced to you to perhaps 20 functions. Okay, numpy.zeros is one, numpy.ones is 0, np.array is another, and so on. So we have, or np.reshape is another, and so on. So we've gone through maybe about 20 functions so far, but that is just 5% of the total functions that are available. 95% have not been touched. Okay. A bit about masked arrays. So masked arrays are basically that can have invalid entries. Okay. That in data, if you have an image, you may have some part of the data which is full of what are called nans, not a number. Okay. Or they have some very ridiculous value, invalid value, -99 or something. Okay. Now suppose you wanted to mask it. So in order to do that, NumPy provides for you a separate sub package called masked array MA. Okay. And so first we create a NumPy array of 5 elements, and we can do a masking by hand. So what you say is that construct a masked array which takes this X as the input array and it creates a mask of this kind. Okay. And here you create another array mx2 which has a mask of this kind. Now what does 0 and 1 mean? It means basically false and true. 0 means false, 1 means true. You could also do it this way. In fact, this is the more Pythonic and the more correct way of doing it in Python. Is equivalent to this mx2 is this thing where you specify the mask as true, true, false, false, false. Okay, rather than putting zeros and ones. See, we could have done this as well. Now if you do print x.mean, that will simply take the mean of these numbers. But suppose your data is such that negative numbers indicate some problem with the data. You don't want to use it and you want to take the mean of only the positive numbers. Okay. Then you see that in this mask mx, we have put 1 here, so this element will be masked. Okay. All the other elements will not be masked. And so if you print out the mean, x.mean, that just takes the mean of all of these numbers, but mx.mean, okay, returns for you the mean of these using this mask and the mean of mx2, which is a masked array. Okay. So it will basically just mask out this, take the sum of these 4 numbers and divide by 4. Instead of taking sum of 5 numbers and dividing, you will take sum of all the unmasked values and compute their mean. You can do all kinds of things on masked arrays. Okay. So for example, if you divide two masked array, where it can do the division, where both arrays are unmasked, the corresponding elements are unmasked, it will do the division. Where one of them is masked, so therefore it can't get a valid value for the division, valid answer for the division, it will mask that particular value. Okay. You can also use the masked where function, which is like the where function in NumPy. Y is equal to mask where x greater than 3, that is the condition, and the array you want to mask. So in this case, what will that be? The value of the masked array. What will be the value of the mask for y? X greater than 3 comma x. You just tell me in terms of true and false. X is your array here. Last value will be true. All other values will be false. So it will be false, 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 true. Okay, because x equal to 3 is not satisfy x greater than 3. Okay, so you can use this kind of function to directly mask. So for example, if you wanted to, you had a 100 by 1000 by 1000 element array and you wanted to mask all negative numbers, you would just say ma.mask where x less than 0 comma x. So mask. You can put any complicated logic here. You can do AND operations. You can even do mask all elements of this array where the elements of that array are invalid. So mask them here and so on. So you can do any kind of complicated mask. Okay. You must understand that there are two ways in which you can perform an operation in NumPy. Many operations in NumPy, either as a method operating on an input, okay, or as a method associated. This is like a function. We should call this a function. A function which operates on an input variable or array or whatever, and a method that acts on its associated object. So every object has its associated methods. Okay, so both of these should give you the same answer. Okay, so what have we done? We have created an array from 0 to 99, and we have asked to compute the sum of all elements of that using the sum function of NumPy, and we have also used it to as the sum method of the object A, and got the same answer. Okay. These two are equivalent. In fact, the way Python is arranged, the code for this is also identical. Okay, it's not that they have written the code 2 times and it gives you the same answer. It uses the same code. Okay, so we don't have time to get into why it uses the same code, but inherently, so if there is a bug in this code, it will also appear in this. Suppose by mistake in your sum you are somehow excluding the last element. Okay, then if there is a bug in np.sum, it will also appear in a.sum. Okay. NumPy also has limited support for doing histograms. Okay, I'm not going to cover it here because something has gone wrong. But anyway, I will be covering histograms in greater detail when I do plotting with Matplotlib, okay, in the next class. But so for now, we will just skip this part. NumPy also has a data type which is called matrix. So if you want to do matrix operations, you can do that. So here's your array. If I do np.matrix x1, it converts the NumPy array x1 into a matrix x2. Okay. Now I can do also things like np.I, which is another function, which is I of 3 constructs an identity matrix. Actually, it's not actually a matrix. It's a NumPy array, which is a 3 by 3 array where all the diagonal elements are 1 and all the other elements are 0. Okay. So print type A tells me that this is a NumPy dot n dimensional array. Now I use the mat function to convert this into a matrix, and since I have A on both sides, now A has changed type and it is NumPy dot matrix lib dot define matrix dot matrix. So it's basically a matrix. I can do operations like B equal to x2 times A. So I am basically doing a matrix multiplication in this case, because both x2 is a matrix here due to this line, and A is also a matrix due to this line. I can also do things like compute the inverse of the matrix A. Okay. Note that this is okay for now. I mean, this is a trivial inverse, it's an identity matrix. But if you want to do very complicated matrix inversions, there are other functions to do this, especially in a module called SciPy. This will be slow. Okay, don't try to do this. In any case, matrix inversion in Python compared to Fortran or C is not going to be very highly optimized. So if you are inverting a 1000 by 1000 matrix, don't try to do it this way. You will be waiting forever. Okay. But for small matrices, this is perfectly adequate. Okay, and here in this case, it has done the inversion of this matrix A and printed out the value. Okay. Important thing to note is that one can do matrix multiplication, one can do matrix vector multiplication, vector matrix multiplication. Okay. Of course, subject to the appropriate rules. I mean, you can't take a incorrect length array and try to multiply it with a matrix. Okay, it will give an error. And only 1 and 2D matrices are supported by this matrix module. You can't do 3-dimensional matrices. There are a number of sub packages which we won't have go into, but I'll just mention the main ones. There is a sub-package of NumPy called FFT, which does discrete Fourier transforms. There is a module called np.linalg for linear algebra, and it can do this Cholesky decomposition, singular value decomposition, compute eigenvalues and vectors, matrix inversion, and so on, and also solve equations using the LAPACK library. There is a module called np.random for random number generation. That's the right module to use if you need to use random numbers. And there are various functions available there to create random numbers within a range, random numbers from a Gaussian distribution, random numbers from a Poisson distribution, etc. So there are many possibilities there. If you want to compute covariances, correlation coefficients, and things like that, Spearman correlation or things like that, then the numpy.statistics module is what you need. Numpy.polynomial is np.polynomial is used for simple root finding and fitting to a polynomial fit to a given set of data points and so on. And np.matlib is the matrix library which can do matrix computations. So how fast is NumPy? NumPy is 100 times faster than a for loop with native Python types, at least 100 times faster, maybe 1000 times faster. Okay. It is still 3 to 10 times slower than a modern Fortran C++ compiler with -03 optimizations and so on. If you compare it with the speed that you would get with IDL, with MATLAB and so on, it is comparable. But remember, all this is run speed. In terms of development, Python is so far ahead of any compiled language like Fortran or C++, that it's really a completely different world. If speed is really critical to your code, you should do what I've suggested previously. Profile your code, find the parts that are slow, rewrite them in Fortran or C or C++, and then run it. So in 2 lectures or 3 lectures from now, I will devote 1 lecture to how to do this, especially how it is very easy to do it using Fortran and a module called F2Py. Okay. We looked at NumPy in some detail. I'm going to talk a bit about SciPy, but I'll just mention some of the other modules that will be useful if you want to do numerical and scientific computing with Python. Matplotlib is a plotting library which we will cover in the next class. so don't worry about that right now. If you use GNU plot, then that is integrated into Python via this module called GNU plot.py, and you can use all GNU plot functionality from within Python. Also, if you like pgplot, SM, etc., they are all fully integrated. They have interfaces, so you can continue to use. If you are an expert in one of these, you can continue to use that. If you want to interface to Mathematica, there is a module called MathLink, which you to basically do some computation here, pass an entire array to Mathematica, have Mathematica do some data processing on it, and send it back to you. If you need to do lots of 3D visualization, then you should definitely look at this module called MayaV. It is developed by a professor at IIT Bombay. He is the lead developer. I mean, there are many others, which does very good 3D visualizations. So if you have particles in a box or whatever which you need to look at, then MayaV is worth looking at. There is PyMat, which is the interface to MATLAB. PyTave is the interface to Octave. Okay. If you use the statistical analysis package R, then RPy module will allow you to call R functions from within Python. Then there is this Minuit multi-dimensional minimization software from CERN, which is also wrapped with using a module called PyMinuit. Okay. Now there is a package under development, a mega package called Sage. Okay. This aims to become an alternative to Magma, Maple, Mathematica, and MATLAB all at one go. Okay. It's under development. I have not used it in recent times, but I hear that it is improving. Okay. But this is a very, very high goal to set, that you are trying to basically wipe out all the big commercial vendors of mathematical software. So I don't know whether that will happen or not, but this is something worth looking at. Remember that in order to use these modules which interface to commercial software like Mathematica or MATLAB, you need to have the appropriate licenses. So this doesn't save you from having a license, but if you have a license, it allows you to use it from within Python. Okay. So now, initially when people started developing numerical capabilities for Python, they started putting everything they developed into the NumPy module. Then the NumPy developer said, no, we don't want this. NumPy should give you some basic functionality for numerical computing. Now, if you want to solve differential equations, if you want to do something else more complicated, then you should do it outside. So they created another module which is called SciPy. It's a sort of mega superset of SciPy. And what I have listed here are basically all the modules that you have, not the modules, the major sub-packages of the SciPy module. For example, there is a package called Integrate, which does numerical integration and solves ordinary differential equations. Then there is also, just like np.linalg, there is a scipy.linalg, which does lots of linear algebra processing. There is a module for n-dimensional image processing. There is a module for orthogonal distance regression. There is a very nice module for optimizing a function. Okay? And if you want to do signal processing, then there is a module specially built for that. And there is more. Okay? There is a module called Sparse, which does handles sparse matrices very efficiently. If you use lots of special functions, then there is a module called Special, which allows you to do Bessel functions and so on very nicely. There is a module called Weave. I will again cover that a little bit in one of the later classes when we talk about integrating Fortran C programs with Python. Okay. And yeah, so there is also stats, which is scipy.stats, which is has all kinds of statistical distributions and functions and tests and so on. So all kinds of things can be done. I don't have time to go through any of these modules, but I would refer you to this URL. This is the SciPy cookbook, okay, and it has example code for lots of commonly done tasks. Some are very basic in nature, but others are more complicated. So as you go toward the end of the page, you get more and more complicated programs. One that you might find very useful is this function called curveFit. It's part of the optimize package, scipy.optimize.curveFit. It basically uses the standard Levenberg-Marquardt algorithm and does a least square fit. Okay, and you can fit any arbitrary function to your data. Okay, so you have some data points and you want to fit absolutely any arbitrary function. You define that function, and it will fit it to the data. Then this is also very useful if you do this kind of function minimization kind of work. It's called the minimize operator, and it has many different solvers that are built in. Okay, the Davidon-Powell Fletcher algorithm, the Nelder-Mead algorithm, simulated annealing, etc., etc. If you go to this website, there are a number of user guides, reference guides, and developer guides for both NumPy and SciPy, which are available at this website. I'll just briefly mention two other modules. We have covered NumPy. I mentioned about SciPy. Now I'm talking about SymPy. Okay, so SymPy is basically the idea is the same idea behind Mathematica, which is computation should be symbolic wherever possible. It shouldn't be numeric. Okay, so there is this SymPy module. If you do import sympy.math, it will import all these modules. Now print math.square root of 8. It just computes the square root and throws out an approximate answer. Okay, this is naturally going to be an approximation of that big irrational number. But if you do print sympy.square root of 8, it does this as a symbolic computation, and it simplifies it as much as possible, but no more, and prints out as 2 square root of 2. Square root of 8, of course, but it hasn't really converted that into a number. And this is a package which is under active development. And so if you do a lot of symbolic computing, like what the people who use Mathematica do, then this is certainly something that one should look at. It is actually included in Sage, which is that big mega package which is trying to replace everything. But you can also install it as a standalone package, standalone module in order to do symbolic computation. The last thing I wanted is something called Pandas, which is short for the Python data analysis library. Okay, and the goal of this particular module is to become a standard statistical analysis and modeling environment like R from within Python. So those of you who know about R is a package, a software package that allows you to do almost any imaginable statistical computation on a piece of data. And there are interfaces. The RPy module is available that will allow you to call R within Python, but that requires you to have a full installation of R on your computer. If you don't want that, then you can try out Pandas. It's really being developed very, very rapidly. Okay, and there is a book called Python for Data Analysis, which I have mentioned in the books that I listed in the first class. In that, this particular Pandas module is covered in great detail. About half the book, I think, is just devoted to this particular module. So it's really quite powerful if you want to do lots of statistical analysis on your data. Okay. So that brings us to the end. So if we'll stop here and take some questions if you have. Yeah, any questions? either I have been very clear or nobody has understood. I don't think it's that complicated. So, but as I've said so many times before, please, some of you I know have been trying out the assignments. Unless you do the assignments, this whatever I'm saying now you will forget in 3 weeks. Okay, so it's of not much use. Okay, so please go back and look at the assignments. These lectures are all being recorded and will be uploaded by this evening. The next lecture will be on Wednesday. Okay, and I will cover matplotlib, which is the plotting package for Python on that day. Yes. In the case of FFT, I think they use the same basic code. Okay, the FFT pack thing. So it shouldn't matter. Okay, I don't fully understand why they have it in 2 places. They should ideally take it off from 1 place to avoid confusion. But I would think as a general principle, use SciPy if as your first choice. And generally it will be a superset. I don't think there will be anything which is not there in SciPy which is there in NumPy. Although the reverse is of course going to be true. There will be many modules which are there in SciPy which are not there in NumPy. I think NumPy, what they did as a compromise was that they said that okay, FFT pack everybody needs or many people need. So let's put it in NumPy so that people don't have to install SciPy just to get this functionality. But that is never a good idea. That is actually in some sense a drawback of Python, that there are many little pieces that you need to install. Okay, you can't avoid that. It's not one monolithic package, it's many little units which you stick together. But yeah, it's an important question. I think I would recommend use SciPy and be done with it. Both are extremely well maintained packages and the documentation is reasonably good. Yeah. But as usual, you should always run test cases to make sure your outputs are sensible before running a very long code. Okay, so let's stop here.